Now, today I'd like to get across something kind of different right off the bat here. I just want to make a bit of a confession that might help to explain a few things and really elaborate on a few things. So, I am something of a fan, I guess is the way to put that, of continuity, right? I've really made no attempt to hide this from anybody. In fact, it's been a pretty solid theme throughout my things, but I never actually come out and said it, so I really wanted to make this clear. I am a big fan of continuity within my fictional works, whatever they may be, books, movies, TV series, video games, whatever, doesn't matter. Excuse me. Now, that being said, part of the reason I mention this is that my enjoyment, or indeed lack of enjoyment, disgust or disdain or otherwise not enjoying myself of any given work, is going to be naturally affected by the fact that there is or isn't continuity within it, right? That just seems logical. It's just kind of the kind of thing I enjoy. I like, and I'm not even going to say that necessarily. Continuity is, okay. I could make the argument, the wrong argument, that continuity is proper writing, and anybody who doesn't actually add continuity to their works is just being lazy or a bad writer or whatever. But that's not true, and I've heard that argument before, and I disagree with it vehemently. There are many valid arguments for someone who does not want continuity within their work. In fact, I know I've mentioned this before, but forgive me for pointing it out. There are people who have been adamantly against continuity within Star Trek, no less, who fought tooth and nail to prevent continuity in what is arguably and debatably the single most important event in the history of Star Trek as far as within in-universe, within canon, and trying to present that as non-contiguous. Now, that being said, there's one other thing I have to also add that I've also heard people say. While I do enjoy continuity and it does affect my enjoyment of something a great deal, continuity does not necessarily mean one cohesive story. Now, let me explain a little bit. Season 3 of Enterprise is probably one of the best examples within science fiction that I can point to then say that is contiguous to continuity. That is literally one episode ends and the next episode again begins right here. It's one to one and then to one into the one. Now, granted, not all of season 3 of Enterprise was good. There were some really bad episodes in there. Carpenter Street. But and that time travel one, I didn't care for that either. I know you're probably saying which time travel one. Let's just leave it alone. Point being, that is not necessarily what I mean by continuity. Deep Space Nine had a pretty strong sense of continuity from now and again. Obviously, they also didn't from time to time. Thomas Riker, but Babylon 5 is probably the example I tend to hold up alongside, say, Farscape for something that has very strong sense of continuity and over. What? And an overall arc that goes throughout the story, rather than just. Okay, my point is, a solid contiguous story is this, whereas you may have several different stories in this with one overall arc, which is more like, say, what Babylon 5 or Farscape did. You follow? Now, that being said, both of these are still continuity, and both of these are still things I'm going to enjoy more than, I don't know, say, Season 1 Voyager, just to throw the example out there, which treats the rest of the episodes like they don't exist. And that's... I don't have a good way to explain it, because it is a preference thing, but that's probably the best way I could give right there. I don't like the idea that the next episode I watch pretends like all the other episodes in the series don't exist, or at the very least just kind of hand waves it away, right? Now, why did that come up in this episode of all episodes? Well, if you've seen that episode, you probably already know why. Although you may be... I don't know what reaction you're anticipating from me, but... But this episode begins with a little 20-second clip. I actually meant to figure out exactly how long it was. I forgot to, but whatever. Brief little clip of, hey, look, here's what happened in the pilot. Here's what happened at the very beginning of the series. And it's this brief little tidbit, blah, 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 blah. Now, I cannot help but find myself completely torn on this, because some of the things it does very well and some of the things it does very poorly. Let's talk about the well first. First of all, the idea of going ahead and going a nod to anybody who, didn't recognize this or whatever, okay, I can go with that. I can understand doing that. And furthermore, they do the teaser pretty well, with one exception I'll get to in a moment. It's not drawn out. None of the information in the actual video clips they show is unnecessary. It just goes... Oh, there you go. It's exactly what a plot dump or info dump really should be. A dump of information, as opposed to, meandering of information, I guess would be the obvious other way to put that. So definite props on that regard. But they do two things really wrong with this. The first is the obvious one. It's a little thing, but little things do count, in my opinion, when it comes to directing and designing and otherwise working with a TV show, video game, book, movie, whatever. And that is the fact that immediately after she starts off with saying 10 months ago, Majel Barrett comes on. Always awesome to hear her. Majel Barrett comes, except when she's playing Loxana Troy. And when you forget to turn your speakers off. So Majel Barrett shows up and is like, hey, and then it's like, oh, right, okay, yeah. 10 months ago. And then the very end of the thing, it says, there's a little text box that shows up that says 10 months later. Now, maybe it's just me, but something about that just kind of detracts from it. It's like the thing from the Departmency of Redundant It's the Department of Redundancy Department. One of those kind of situations. It's like, why do you bother repeating yourself here? What's the point of emphasizing the thing that you just told us about 20 seconds ago? Why do that? But that is admittedly a nitpicky thing. That's the kind of thing that, gets down to, my directorial sense, I guess, or directive sense, or what do you want to call it. That's not a big deal. What bothers me most is the fact that this was felt to be necessary at all. And the reason why is very simple. Back in Caretaker, at the end of Caretaker, they made a point of saying, we know that the other life form is out there, so we're going to go searching for her and try to figure out what we can find. Okay, good, I'm with that. And then, about 30-ish episodes pass with absolutely zero mentions of this ever in any way, shape, or form. Nothing. Then out of nowhere, bam! Oh, by the way, we're following up on that plot. See, my problem with this is, continuity can be done poorly as well, just like everything can. And this is exactly what this feels like. It feels like they're treating continuity as a we're out of ideas bucket, rather than continue on with, and I know that's not actually what they do. I'm just saying this the general impact this has when you do it like this. It's like, I don't even have an analogy to give, because the thing that actually happens is better analogy than any analogy I could give. Nothing happens ever. It's not even mentioned. It's not even hinted at. It's not even pointed. And then all of a sudden, bam! Okay, we're going to resolve this plot thread. Whammo! Just like that. No, that's not how you do it. And I don't care for its presentation here at all. So I just wanted to get that out of it. It's the very first point I wanted to mention. So let's actually look at our list of notes here. One thing I do like, and I'm going to mention this later on within the episode as well, with regards towards how this is going to progress. I like the idea that Tuvok is the one teaching Cass how to harness her mental powers, not because Vulcans have mental powers, which is established, by the way, within Trek canon, so that's not exactly a bad thing, but because Vulcans have mental discipline. And you might be saying, well, why do you like that, Archie and Gaia? The reason why is because too often it's treated in fiction, across all mediums, that, once you gain access to superpowers or whatever abilities, you basically just learn how to use it, and you're automatically capable of dealing with it and all the problems therewith. Now, yes, I know not everyone does that, but in general, for most of the stuff I've seen, the majority of the time, however you want to put that, that tends to be the approach. Now you know how to do this. And the exceptions are exactly that, exceptions. I like the idea that the implication here, which is actually thrown out the window towards the end of the episode, but whatever. The implication here is that she actually already has all these powers, all these mental powers, as they call it, but she just needs to hone her ability to utilize her own mental faculties, her mental discipline, in order to use them properly, in order to use them more. If you'll forgive me for putting this in very simple real-life terms, you as a human being probably have the power to pick up a pen and write with it. But it is only with practice and honing of the discipline of the utilization of this that you could learn how to actually draw with it, and how to make a sculpture or whatever, or to do flowery writing, or to analyze, to hold it very still in order to do something great. All of these different things you can do with this power. You can't really do. I mean, all you can do is this, unless you actually learn, okay, how to properly move these muscles, how to refine the control of them, how to move them in exactly the right, that kind of thing, right? If you'll forgive me for using a really bad example, X-Men First Class talked about this idea too. He kept, the person who played Xavier kept relating the mutant powers to a muscle. This is a muscle that you need to learn how to control and utilize, right? I actually kind of like that. And this is just another, a better expression of that kind of thing. And earlier I might have. But anyways. I also want to say props to the whole deal with the Neosporian Neosporin. Wait, Neosporin? Neocystian? Sporocystian! That's what it was. The Neosporin bad guy. He comes over and... Yeah, no, okay. The Sporocystian life form. This is actually several threads. I made a couple notes of it as I go here, but I just want to say props, because it's exactly the right kind of thing I want in my show, and that is making sense. Too often, when someone says, this may be a dangerous situation, this just happened in Tattoo, actually. This just happened. Too often, someone will say, this is a dangerous situation, we should be cautious. They do not say we should go running in guns blazing. They do not say we should be like, or whatever. What they do say is we should approach this with a degree of caution, because guess what? We're space explorers, and this is a dangerous job, as we just found out by the redshirt who got all the salt sucked out of him to prove the situation's serious. I like the fact that someone, Tuvok in this case, suggests maybe we should have a backup plan. And then Janeway says, I agree. And every time it's brought up, Tuvok reiterates that he does this with the hope that he doesn't have to use it. And that, in my opinion, I really got to give props, not just to the actors and the directors, but to the writers, because, in my opinion, that's exactly correct. We should be prepared to defend ourselves. That doesn't mean we're gunning for a fight. It means we are prepared to defend ourselves. And it's so rare to see Star Trek do that properly, at least not Deep Space Nine. And it's so much more common to see someone, especially within Star Trek, Enterprise was really bad about this, where whenever someone would have that kind of attitude, they would be, smugged out of the room with this condescending attitude of, oh, take your violent ways away from me. Begone, peasant. We will simply... I can't even do it. I can't do it. I am not that pretentious. Maybe many things, but not that. So I like the way they did that. I want to give some praise for Jennifer. Jennifer Lean, I still haven't heard her name pronounced. The woman who plays Kes. She does an excellent job throughout this episode of portraying someone who is, for all intents and purposes, a child. And I don't mean a child as an well, okay. Someone who is young. Let's actually put it that way. Someone who is youthful, someone who is relatively innocent and naive, someone who doesn't really know that much about, how life works and whatnot. There's idealism instead of cynicism. There's hopefulness instead of despair. That kind of thing, right? She does a good job of playing this and portraying someone who, thanks to the situation, is being sucked into a situation that she didn't really count on, she didn't really want to be in, and ultimately does not actually want once she understands it. If you follow where I'm going with that. So she does a good job with that. Now, that being said, I'm going to talk about this. There's actually 2 points here with both say fail potential on my list here. I want to talk about one of the things that I've always regretted about Kes, and that is the fact that very few Kes episodes are in fact Kes episodes. I know I've said this before, forgive me for repeating myself, but one of my biggest complaints about Voyager is, aside from a few characters, most of the characters do not have character arcs. They have nothing planned out, they have nothing prepared, they have nothing, period. They're just there. Chakotay is one of my biggest complaints about that. With Robert Beltran and the background he gave for Chakotay, I feel like there was so much potential that was just basically never used. Kes is another good example of this. Kes was just kind of there. She was just kind of the mental powers, generic magic department, and she was the generic health department, and that's really it. Now, there were a lot of things they could have done with Kes, but this episode, I think, highlights the biggest problem with how they were approaching Kes. If you really analyze this episode, as I just did, and if you really go into depth looking at the episode and its construction and its deconstruction and how it fits together, you understand that here's the biggest problem. Aside from the acting, and I'm going to put that aside, Jennifer did a good job of portraying the character, but the episode did not. You understand where I'm going with this? If you're not, let me continue to try and elaborate. Rather than actually exploring the character of Kes, all we see is Kes as she already is. She does not grow, she does not change, she does not adapt, she remains Kes. We do not learn anything about her. The episode, in short, to put it as bluntly as I can, is not actually about Kes. And the best way you can ever determine such a thing like this, within any more form of fiction, to determine if this is about the character or if the character is relevant, is to replace that character with another character. Same general circumstance. Let's say Tom had mental powers, okay? Put Tom in there in her place. Now, actually, Tom wouldn't work that well because Tom is a very probably the most worldly, quote unquote, character without any Voyager. But my point remains. Let's put Bob here. Bob is a thing of water here. Fago, I believe. I'm actually not sure how to pronounce that. So this is now in Kess's place, and Kess is using her. Fago is using his mental powers, and is being tempted because he's never actually encountered this sort of thing before. And then he uses his mental powers again and gets kind of freaked out about it. Oh my god, you get where I'm going with this? Replacing it would have changed the nuance of some of the scenes, but ultimately, as far as the writing and development of the story, it was not about Kess. This episode was primarily about the Ocampa. Well, actually, no, it really wasn't. I would say it's about the mental powers, but that's just kind of thrown out the window too. I'll talk about that later. But it's more about the whole Suspiria thing. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But if you actually watch the episode, about 70% of all the episode is focused on the camera, I should say, is focused on Kess, and usually Kess and I can't even think of his name. I was just watching this episode like 10 minutes ago. Whatever. The guy from that one show. Anyways, it's just a disappointment to me because I feel like they could have done some more. Let's talk about these two missed potential points in a nutshell. Actually, I guess there's three. My bad. First and foremost, it is a shame. It is such a lost. It is such a shame that they did not actually continue the Voyager's reputation thread. What do you mean, Arshinga? Towards the beginning of the episode, Bobface, the Skokampa, I think his name was Tannen, says about how Voyager is known as a ship of death and how they've got a horrible reputation. He starts listing off things they've done, right? And they immediately say, oh, no, it's all lies and misinformation. And then they let the thread go and never touch it again. Would it not be so much more interesting that if they'd actually done something with that? In fact, in the Imperium version of Voyager that I was writing on the side, that was actually going to be a major thread, was how Voyager is viewed amongst the other races and the other powers and people and whatnot within the sector. Because so often Voyager seems to forget, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but it's the obvious thing. We all do this. Voyager seems to forget the fact that they're on their own out here. That these are different cultures, people who react differently and think of things differently. They forget that word of mouth tends to happen and is not the most reliable source of information to be passed. Think about the impact that all of their incidents would have on how people perceive them within this area. It would have been fascinating to see somewhere actually go with that. And by the way, in my changes version, I would mention that too. I'll go ahead and make a note of that when I get to that towards the end here. But anyways, second point. Where is it? So one of the biggest problems in television specifically is budget, okay? You really, really, really are limited in what you can do based on your budget, and that's just right? Especially for an episode like this, where you basically have to decide where you put the little money you have, too. And it's obvious they decided to put it into the Suspiria scenes and into the blowing up the Arboretum thing. Now, both of those scenes were probably fairly expensive, so they didn't really have much else to go off of. And it very much shows, because the array is literally the exact same model from the first one. Understandable and explained. And then the office. The only thing we ever see on the other station is the one office. And we only ever see two other Ocampa, the guest star, and then one other guy who has a couple of lines, and that's it. I'm going to talk more about this in my changes section, but think about how much more interesting it would have been if they'd actually done something with that. Whatever his name is himself. What did I write down his name? This is going to bother me. I'm going to look this up really quick. I'm sorry. Bobface. Hang on. Here we go. Okay. Tanis. I was close. Tanis. Imagine Tanis makes a line when they're in the aeroponics bay about how cold and sterile and lacking in life this place is. Kess immediately contrasts him by saying how many people are on board. He says, well, yes, but that's not the point. Look around you. Look at these bulkheads and these cold steel walls. There's no life here, Kess. And he makes a big point of it, right? My reason for bringing this up is, again, missed potential. Imagine what they could have done by using their budget problems, using the limited budget in their favor. You know, the Jaws effect, if you prefer the movie version of this. In other words, why not actually make it a point that he is basically either being a hypocrite or flat out lying because he himself exists within the same environment? indeed you could have said that he and the other Okampa are the only two, because we never see any others, would it not be him reflecting on his own existence as someone who is, lacking everything because all he is surrounded by is this cold, sterile station, that when he goes to there, it's the first thing he points out because it's the first thing he would notice? Even though there's more people around here, even though he's surrounded by plants, all I can think about is the fact that he's still in this metal box in the middle of nowhere, Just some failed potential there. The final failed potential is a little bit later. I think I'm going to go to that last because I want to do this kind of in order like I usually try to. So let's go ahead and mention the temptation thing. Props to the guest actor. I don't know his name, unfortunately, but he actually does a pretty good job of this role. And he does one thing very importantly that helps elevate this story above, the kind of averageness it is. And that is he portrays a fairly acceptable, very Mephistopheles type of temptation, very classic temptation, He shows up and says, hey, he's amiable, he's diplomatic, he's kind, he's curious about her, he wants to know more about her, and he gives her just a little bit of a temptation, just a taste of what it is they can do, and it's something he knows she cares about. In this case, he makes all the flowers and plants grow, right? It's the first step. Then he leaves. And that's important when it comes to that kind of temptation. You don't just gorge them. You don't just do anything. You give them a moment to think about it, and all their self-doubts and worries and fears and other problems will all do the work for you. That's kind of how that works, the power of silence, if you prefer. Then the next time he shows up, he starts moving her forward very rapidly, I might add, towards, pyrokinesis, I believe. And again, this actually makes perfect sense because then he intentionally encourages her to utilize this power in order to do this, specifically because he knows she will use it improperly. Now, I'm not actually sure. I may be giving the episode too much credit, but the structure of this is so solid that I feel like this was done intentionally, because it's like giving a child, teaching a child how to use a match and then handing them a gun, basically. If you'll forgive me for the really poor analogy. You're doing this because you know they're going to screw up, and you have a plan in mind. In fact, when they screw up, you can then turn around and say, all right, well, now, obviously, now that you have this gun in your hands, because, this is a bad analogy, but follow with me. Now that you have the ability to set things on fire with your mind, you need the kind of training and discipline in order to take care of that and to deal with that. And I can provide that. And then he tries to tell her more about, tries to start selling her on more of his bull crap. I'll get to this in a second. I'll just skip over that section for a moment because just remembering it makes me want to go, ugh. And then he encourages her to go ahead and once again bring the fire. And in so doing, he not only tries to get across some of his philosophy, he says it himself best, life, death, taking, killing, doesn't matter. And also emphasizing the fact that she has so little control over what she does that she needs, again, to come with him. And each step of the way he says the same thing towards the end. There's no rush, even though he knows there is, and we, having seen the episode now, know there is a rush, there is a time deadline here. But he keeps emphasizing, there's no rush, there's no hurry, just take your time and do what you have to, obviously. And even when Janeway earlier points out, that there's no need to make a decision right now, again, he says, yes, you're absolutely right. There's plenty of time to think about this. He's appearing to be absolutely reasonable at every step of the point, which is also elevating his argument or his temptation, or whatever you want to call it, in her eyes. I want to also say props to that scene, by the way, I just mentioned. Earlier on, Janeway is surprisingly diplomatic when it comes to this. In fact, throughout most of this episode, she is surprisingly diplomatic when it comes to that. I say that because in a lot of episodes, Janeway is portrayed as incredibly undiplomatic. And a lot of the time, I've talked about this before, it's usually done to make it, so she's Janeway, a strong female character. But I like it when they actually show that Janeway can have, a modicum of reasonability in her portrayal rather than just, so definite props to that as well. Overall, I'm most positive about this episode. But all right, let's go ahead and talk about one last thing before I get to the final thing, and then the final thing, whatever, and then the final thing. Okay, one thing I get a little bit sick of, by which I mean a lot sick of, obviously I just mentioned this, is in fiction. This isn't just limited to science fiction, but science fiction's really bad about this. The phrase superior. Oh shoot, I suddenly can't think of the word. superior capacity breeds superior ambition, okay? I'm using the wrong word. I don't know what's in place of capacity. It's not power. But the idea that, the moment we gain more than what we have, as flesh and blood human beings, we just go on these ego trips of doom. And that whole power corrupts thing, which, by the way, I don't actually want to get into that concept because I actually disagree with the idea that power corrupts, but in all honesty, let's just not talk about that, okay? Let's just leave that be. The point is, within fiction, writers love to use that. And if you don't believe me, try to remember that the second episode of Star Trek ever, the actual pilot, where no man has gone before, used exactly that thing. Gary Mitchell and what's her face both gained superpowers, and as a result, immediately just started going off the deep end and becoming these psychotically evil, and I do mean cartoonishly evil in many cases, people who just, don't take, your life is irrelevant and blah, blah, blah. Look at the movie representation of Magneto, is another good example within the X-Men movies. And I say the movie representation, by the way, because the comic representation is all over the place, but most people I know would agree that the comic representation is just not. And then there's, there's a movie, there's just... Anyways, my point I'm getting to is I get really sick of it. I get really sick of hearing the same crap. They all say the same crap. As I was listening to Tanis' speech that he's giving Kes, he does this actually 3 times throughout the episode. Each time, I felt like I could have actually predicted the words he was saying as they were saying them. And not just because I've seen this episode a few times before, but because it's all the same stuff. Every time a writer, I swear, a writer has some superior being is like, oh, I'm superior. You just need to look beyond. And oh, these poor, helpless little humans, and they're just so minuscule and irrelevant, we should just treat them as though they're nothing, because, they're objects to be pitied, not people. And it's just the same ideas over and over. I know this is me. I know this is just personal opinion, but I get so tired of hearing that crap. To give you an example, even the founders over in Deep Space Nine, who were overall fairly well written, all things considered, and certainly something that the show really used to great effect for all aspects of the story, character setting, plot, etc. Nevertheless, still had this same problem of, oh, there's poor little things. Now, there is one thing I could logistically seriously point to say why this aggravates me so. Try to imagine the same superior tone, and instead say something along the lines of more real life. Like, instead of, oh, these will never know the joy of touching things with your mind, instead bring it down to earth. Oh, these poor people will never understand what it's like to enjoy a proper meal, or to bathe in champagne, or to not have to worry about taxes, or anything in real life that the elite rich people that actually do exist across the world do enjoy that we can't. Now, maybe that's the point. Maybe that's what the writers are going for. But I've said this before, and I'll say this again. Even if you're aggravating me for a purpose, even if you're irritating or annoying or being disgruntling or whatever on purpose, that doesn't change the fact that you're still irritating me. I've said this before several times. And so it still irritates me when someone like that is giving this superior haughty attitude, and the fact that everyone just can't seem to come up with a new way to present it. Now, I am exaggerating. I am generalizing. I do apologize for that. But in this episode, Tanis was actually well portrayed in many ways, and I've already talked about several of these. But when he starts preaching, and there's no really better word for it, preaching about how superior he is and how far beyond these pathetic creatures he is, it just comes across as tired. I almost felt like the actor himself was bored saying those lines. You know what I mean? And once again, I have to refer to failed potential because, well, I'll get to that in a moment. Now, one thing I wanted to mention is kind of an aside. I've talked before about the problem with child actors. And there's a lot of problems with child actors. That's not a dig or a jab or anything like that. It's just true. It's life. There are a lot of problems with working with child actors. But one of the more interesting ways to get around that, and this only works in certain circumstances, is to have a child actor who is basically lip-syncing while an adult is dubbed in to do the voice, right? Doing that actually works well under certain circumstances, like this one, for several reasons. Number one, you still have all the impact of having the child on the screen. Number two, you still have all the acting capacity that that an adult who is more accustomed to their craft and has been working longer and can be brought in whenever to do these lines rather than having to be at bed by 9 or whatever the actual film rules is. I don't remember off the top of my head. Can do. You have all the benefits of that, and the adult can get across nuances and subtleties in their voice that a child simply generally can't, statistically speaking, especially on Star Trek, who, again, budget problems. So you're not really going to get a very good child actor, all things considered, are you? And number three, it adds to that off sensation. Making it's a child speaking with an adult's voice. I don't really have to explain anything here, do I? It adds to the whole atmosphere of a scene if you're going for an atmosphere like that, like they were in this case. And I do think it worked very well to have Suspiria be the child and speak with the adult's voice. I actually kind of wish they had done the adult's voice the entire time, to be completely honest with you. But at least when they switched to her, the change was immediate for me. I was listening for it this time around, especially. The change in subtlety and nuance in her tone and actually getting across what she's feeling, it works so much better with the voice than it does with the child, with her visual. But nevertheless, the point I'm saying is it's overall a net positive, so definite props there. Now I'm gonna go ahead and mention my last irritation with this whole thing last, because it's kind of a changes thing. But I do want to add one last thing. As I've been going through Voyager, doing these ruminations, I've noticed quite a lot that, even in an episode I don't really like all that much, I tend to like the coda. It's very strange. Persistence of Vision is a good example of this. Despite the episode just kind of being like, the coda, nevertheless, was actually quite good, all things considered. Tattoo was even similar to this, with the one exception I already mentioned, of course. This is another good example of that. The coda in this one has Tuvok talk about Vulcans in a proper manner. I'll just put it that way. Anybody who is a true Trekker knows what I mean. He was not being, Enterprise Vulcan. He was being a Vulcan, and in a good way. And he got that across. And Kes was being, an Okampa who's being Kes in a good way. It was probably the only really good character scene for Kes, in my opinion, in the whole show, and really helped bookend the way the episode worked. So definite props there. I get this weird feeling that they had one writer over on the side, and it was his job to, after the rest of the episode had been written, to write the coda just for that episode. It's just this impression I get. I'm sure I'm wrong. It's just I've noticed this trend. Now let's talk about, first of all, did I like this episode then? Not really, to be completely honest with you. But watching it again this time around, I actually found myself enjoying this episode a lot more than I thought I would. So, definite, really looking into it, really analyzing, and helped me enjoy this episode a lot more than I did before. Now, there are only really 3 changes I would make to this episode, because I don't think many are necessary. Change number 1. Get rid of the intro thing by Majel Barrett. As much as I, pseudo-praised that at the beginning, in my opinion, it would work better for both camps of people, which I'll explain in just a moment, to simply remove that in its entirety. Have the intro be about Kes, mental powers, discipline with Tuvok, goes to see the doctor, and then the thing starts shaking, fung, cut to the intro, right? Or cut to the title crawl. That would have worked better for the people who didn't remember it was, because it's an effective teaser even regardless of all information. One item in the doctor's thing just starts acting strangely. Oh my god, what's going on, right? Number 2, for the second camp of people who actually recognize what that is and actually have been paying attention to the continuity, obviously it means so much more because, oh my gosh, that's the caretaker and he's reacting. What's happening? Oh my god, you follow? But there's also a third point here. It doesn't treat the audience like they're stupid. I know I've talked about this a lot, especially with Voyager up to date, and indeed, this is going to continue throughout Season 2 for the most part. But I really like it when a show doesn't treat you like an idiot, and I really hate it when anything, TV show, movie, book, etc., treats you like you're stupid and feels like they have to smash every bit of information into your face just like that. That just gets on my nerves. So, I would just eject the intro in its entirety. Let the audience figure it out for themselves. They'll probably enjoy the experience more for it. Number 2. This is actually number 2.5. This is all one big thing. One of the things that they hint throughout the episode and then immediately drop is the idea that Tanis actually has no mental powers of his own per se. He is actually fully connected to Suspiria, and that the only reason he has anything was her. The idea here being that Suspiria was the source of the powers all along, and that Tanis... I like this because it advances the idea that despite all his claims of the fact that, the caretaker was limiting us and keeping us in a bottle and blah blah blah, Suspiria is doing the exact same thing, just in a different way, because she is ensuring that the Ocampa here, and Antanas in specific, are only advancing in the ways she allows, because the only powers and abilities he has are the ones she directly grants him. You follow? I like that idea a lot better. And I also liked the idea that the only reason Kess would start, manifesting her powers and such is because she was also starting to connect to Suspiria in her own way, and that's why she was able to do these things and blah blah blah. And I also think that would explain the end a little bit better. I didn't talk about this yet, but the end of this episode is so pat. And if you don't know what that means, it's like, I don't even feel like explaining it. It's just, oh my god, build up, build up, build up, build up. No, okay, everything's fine. That's the best way I can describe a pat ending right there. The idea here is that, you know what, I don't even feel like discussing it. It is such a boring idea, and that's the problem. That is the problem with a pat TV ending. There's nothing interesting there at all. It's not even bad. It's just, okay, whatever. It would have been much more interesting to me if they had more further explored this idea that the only reason, like, okay, they've talked this whole episode, they've built up this whole episode about this weapon they've been building just in case, for self-defense, in order to fight Suspiria. What if it didn't work at all? What if they got off the chance and, big moment, and of course you're watching this Star Trek episode, you're expecting it to work. It doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. And it's like, oh god. But what ends up saving them is the fact that Tanis has been trying to connect Kess to Suspiria, and Kess, upon forming this connection fully, finally, understands the situation, and rather than reacting as Tanis expected her to, uses that to backlash through him to her, and that's, and they kind of even did this in a way. I feel like this episode had a page 3 rewrite or something like that, because that's sort of what happens, even though it's then explained that it's not. Oh my god, it reacts and it causes her to go off, and then she's basically left, debilitated, powerless, at least for a brief period of time, stunned, in other words. And then they have their little talk, and then she leaves, and blah blah blah, the end. But the other important thing about that is, would it not be more interesting... Wait, what does that say? Yeah, whatever. Would it not be more interesting if the point here, and this would be, again, emphasizing Kess's character, Kess as an individual, would be that all this power she has in her mind is actually something special, in other words, if you forgive me for putting in such terms. That because she has been working on it on her own, I'm sorry, I'm saying this wrong. Because she has been working on it, rather than having it spoon-fed to her, her powers actually turn out to be the stronger. That's why and how she can overwhelm him, and indeed Suspiria. Because she has actually earned these powers, and through this mental discipline she keeps learning from Tuvok, learn to utilize it. You follow where I'm going with this? And on top of that, not only does that make that ending more satisfying, but it also gives us a nice contrast from a thematic perspective of Tanis, who had power handed to him on a silver platter and acted all superior to it, to Kess, who earned it and managed to remain humble throughout the occasion. Which also, I just feel like pointing out, also shows is a good way of showing that power does not corrupt. I just felt like pointing that out. Let's move on. I think that would just be a lot more satisfying way to resolve this, to really make that clear. And at the end of the episode, have Kess mentioned that, her powers haven't gone away. She actually makes that point, all the powers have gone away. No. I would say all the powers stay, and indeed that she's actually stronger than she's ever been before. Not because of anything regarding, Suspiria or the Incausion, but just because she finally had to stretch. She finally had the occasion to reach out and use it, and she was using all that discipline, and that's one of the reasons she now is so insistent upon going to Tuvok and getting more mental discipline and in learning how to utilize this power even to an even greater extent. Because now she has more power to take care of, and she wants to be responsible about that. And I think that would be a more satisfying conclusion, personally. That's just me. I also just feel like pointing out that it really would have been nice if they had kind of mentioned the whole Suspiria pseudo-caretaker thing, prior to now. 30 episodes later. Whatever. Moving along. I think it's like 29 episodes. Whatever. Doesn't matter. Either way, that's this episode. I'm going to go ahead and get working on my next video. So I'll catch you guys later.